We are planning breaks, so we're going to have 2 breaks today, and we are also going to have some breakout spaces where folks can speak in smaller groups, and we're hoping to have this be a very engaging space. So before all that, we're going to introduce ourselves and then start with our expectations for the training today and guideposts for how we'll be in space. So my name is China Aquino. I am a program manager at the Detroit office for the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And we work very closely with Micah, and I also work specifically on leading our housing advocacy efforts to bring together the housing system and the systems that we work with to serve survivors. Paige?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so grateful to be here. Thank you, Micah, for having us. I am really excited to talk about the topic that we have at hand and to get to know all of you better. I've already gotten very distracted in the chat bar because I have already found some fellow book nerds, and we're talking books right now, and I'm loving that. But more formally, I am Paige Alia, and I am the Prevention Program Manager at the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And yes, thank you for taking the time. This is a long afternoon, and we really, truly hope that what we share together in this space creates learning and teaching and growing for all of us together. So just as we get started, I know that we were doing some intros in the chat. If you would, we're really curious about what your roles are. So whether you identify as like an advocate or a supervisor or a middle manager or an executive leader of some sort, if you want to just pop that into the chat, we'll just take a moment. And also, if you feel like unmuting and sharing that, you are welcome to do that as well.
Well, I am Beth Notarius at People's Express. We're a nonprofit, and we help seniors and those with disabilities and those that are disadvantaged get to where they need to get to remain in life. And life-sustaining appointments and community and connection and access to the job so that they can participate in in life. The mission that we have, I need to bring into, we've grown, and with our all the pressures that we have in our business, I feel like we're losing sight of why we're here. And I want our company to embody this.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Beth.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We are getting a variety of responses in the chat as well. And there is a huge amount of diversity in the roles. So that is really exciting. And a big part of why we're asking this is just to see how we can tailor things to all of you in this space today. I'm just continuing to read through. Welcome, welcome. Beautiful. China, are we ready?
Yes, I think so.
All right, we'll keep it going. And if you're still typing in, no worries. Always feel free to add that. But we'll continue on.
Yeah, and before we move on, I'm just reflecting on Beth unmuting and sharing, and then also the comments. And so I am seeing a lot of different levels of leadership. And so that's interesting because it's going to hopefully bring a lot of enrichment to our training today, because psychological safety is tied to so many different things. So Beth, you mentioned your organization's mission. This is tied to our workplace culture, our mission, our values, how we embody those. And it's also related to specific things like our policies, procedures, the workplace supports that we have for staff. And so Paige and I, we were really nerding out about this topic, and we tried to fit as much as we could in 4 hours, but there's so many different follow-ups or second trainings that could come from this. So we are trying to tailor our content to our audience today. And so you all are helping to build the training and enrich it in a way that makes most sense for you. So I'm really looking forward to how this evolves today. So as you saw when you registered for the training, some of the outcomes or objectives that will result from the training are that you'll get at least 3 examples of what psychological safety is, what it looks like, and you will learn how it impacts our work, our staff retention, how it prevents burnout, and how it overall creates a workplace culture that either supports our mission, or maybe there's some things that are preventing or holding us back from fully living our values and our mission. And we are also going to talk about multiple examples and different ways that psychological safety can be created in the workplace. What does it look like? What are some specific actions that can be taken? And you all will also help create some of those examples. So we're looking forward to that. And then we do want to pause because we have some guideposts for the space. And we want to make sure that folks feel comfortable and that you are taking care of yourself, because you may have been on your computer all day already, and we're about to be sitting here for even longer. And we know that 4 hours is a long time. So again, we will have 2 10-minute breaks planned, and we are going to try and stay on target with those, because we know that breaks are important to learning and getting the most out of the training. And with that being said, at any point, if you need to use the restroom, please feel free to do so. This is recorded, so you may get a copy of this later in case you missed a specific section. And again, we have an intimate group of folks here, so we are encouraging folks to engage in the chat, unmute, come off camera. This is a positive of the training. So there's benefits to having trainings that are, really big or really small, but we've got an intimate group here. And so that's something that we can utilize and take advantage of. And another thing we want to highlight is that folks are welcome to use the reactions at the bottom of the screen. And then you can also put emojis in the chat. We encourage emojis. We love them. Sometimes they capture how you're trying to feel. So we want to let folks know that we appreciate and encourage that. And again, this training is being recorded. So when we have group discussion and when we go into smaller breakout rooms, we do want to remind folks to share only what they have learned and not specific details of someone else's story that they might have heard. The last note I have here is If you have questions during the training, throughout the training, please put the questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And then we may address the question right there, or we may put it in the parking lot and address it later in the training. And yes, thank you in the chat right now. Allison said the breakout rooms are not recorded, only the main room. Yes, so please keep that in mind. I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so some of you, if you've attended a coalition training, you might have seen this slide before. Guideposts are the agreements and the values that we are trying to put into space before we go through the training to create some shared agreement on how we're going to interact with the content, interact with each other. We are being intentional about having this touch point and check-in because that is an example of psychological safety that we'll get into, but also because learning is a vulnerable space, and especially psychological safety. The topics that we're going to talk about, examples that people might bring into space, are very personal, and they involve a lot of difficult feelings and aspects of being in a workplace, or maybe being in a workplace that doesn't have psychological safety. So we have some values here that we would like to bring into space, and we want you folks to unmute, share your thoughts. How would you define something here? Is there something here that you're not understanding, or you're not sure it makes sense? This is not something that Paige and I agree on and we move forward with. We want your buy-in as well. So I will pass it off to Paige to give a few definitions, and we encourage you also to reflect on these guideposts and let us know if something really resonates with you, or something is confusing to you, or you want clarification. We are hoping that the participants here can help us define what these mean.
Just for clarity, are you waiting for us to ask questions if we have them? Or are you going to be talking about these guideposts?
The answer is both.
Ah,
And something that you can expect on our end is to offer a lot of pauses. Our brains all work in a variety of ways, and one thing that we've learned, that particularly for adult learners, sometimes a little bit of a pause helps people to process. And while quiet is one of those things that I think culturally we can be uncomfortable in, we also know that we need it to think and to learn. So you're invited to be in that silence with us at times, and we'll often just give space to that pause. But yes, I'm totally going to talk about some of these, and also if there are ones that you are particularly curious about or have reflections on, or are like, I have no idea what that means, this is the space for it.
well, I'm excited to hear how you use ouch.
That's a great one. Let's start with that one, because I think this is one that is often at the forefront of like, what in the world does that mean? And I'll share a little bit, and then I'll ask China to share more. in terms of our use of ouch language. So the full guidepost is use I statements and ouch. So the use of I statements is that we are bringing our own perspective and not placing opinions, ideas, perspective onto anyone else or making those like assumptions about others in the space with us. So we're sharing our own perspectives, which, by the way, are very valuable because we all bring such a unique sense and perception in the world. So we invite that openly. Ouch is a way to signify if something in a space was harmful to you. And that gives China and myself as facilitators the opportunity to also check in with you regarding that particular ouch.
Thank you, Paige. Another way that I use ouch is as a participant. If I feel that a belief or a statement that has been brought into space is harmful and I want to share that I'm feeling that way, then I can say ouch. So ouch is a signal for us as facilitators, but it also can be a tool to call other people in. So with a training topic like psychological safety, there will be some hard topics that come up. And we recognize that learning requires vulnerability. So using I statements or ouch, those are tools that we can use to remove I won't say remove, I'll say be intentional about how we are contributing to the conversation, because it is hard, and if no one felt comfortable sharing, then we wouldn't have any dialogue, and then that is a big part of our learning. So folks don't have to say ouch if they're feeling like they had an ouch moment. You can keep that to yourself. We don't want folks to feel obligated to disclose that. Ouch is an opportunity for you to contribute to the conversation if you want to put that into space and call other folks in, including the facilitators. And then I statements are something that everyone can use. It's a good way of pausing and being intentional about what you're bringing into space. So sometimes when we don't have that pause, or we are not being as intentional, we may end up saying things that are generalized or more charged or activating. And if we are agreeing to pause and come into the space with keeping in mind where we're coming from and that others have different experiences, we're creating a safer learning space. And using I and ouch statements is directly tied to pledging, own, and assuming best intent. So I and ouch statements only work if we are trusting that others are assuming the best intent of everyone in the room, and that we are giving ourselves that grace and committing to being intentional about how we show up in this space. So it is kind of a give and take, but I really want to appreciate and highlight you because you asked us a question already, and we're just at guideposts, so we really appreciate it. And I'd love for other folks to share comments, thoughts, even if you just say, yep, we need a lot of respect or something like that. Please share your thoughts.
Well, I have another question then. In business meetings, everybody wants to show up and get the job done. And then they get back to work, get the meeting over with so I can get back to work. And so sometimes I find it awkward to try to get a meeting starting off where we are in sync and settled down and in sync, because there's a lot of pressure in the jobs that we are doing. Do you have any ideas or suggestions of how to make this uh, help people to understand the value of this without having to have to describe it every time? And how can we make this a quick but required process before every meeting?
I want to make sure I am understanding the question, and that is, how do we essentially embed guideposts into the beginning of a meeting without spending like what we're doing now, which is 15-20 minutes on it at the beginning of each meeting? Okay. I think that that looks like building it into the culture of the workplace that we're in, which is what we're going to talk about all afternoon. So we are right now all meeting together for the first time with China and myself, facilitating this space. So this looks like right now the establishing. So we are just setting up the first parts of the scaffolding, if you will, or whatever kind of metaphor you like to think about, the groundwork. We're laying that down to begin to create a container of psychological safety in a space. So we're working at this point to build some connection with all of you, to build that respect, to cultivate that buy-in. And we also recognize it might take longer than right now, like this one slide, right? So what we're going to then attempt to do is display this, share examples of this, and also live it. Because that, in essence, in order to have that psychological safety, we have to be in it in order to create that container.
Thank you, Paige, and thank you, Beth, for your question. I did make a note. I'm putting it in the parking lot, but I know we're going to end up discussing this topic. So I'm glad that you brought that into space, because you brought up a really valid point of there's not enough time for anything. And so we, whether it is in for-profit or nonprofit, there's this culture of there's not enough time. There's a scarcity of people's resources, attention span, time to meet. And so how do we make use of the time in the most efficient way? And we are going to discuss some examples and strategies for this as we go through the training. Any other thoughts for our guideposts before we move on?
What are folks' understanding of Vegas rules?
What happens here stays here.
Yes, we like to think about this one as like the learning should absolutely leave and be shared, but individual stories should remain in this space. And the challenge of that in this space is we're also recording. And I know we've mentioned that already, but as another reminder, we are recording. So just being mindful of that and knowing that what you're sharing in this main room, it becomes a part of that recording. And so that you get to have conscious and full consent before sharing anything. But the breakout rooms, as Allison mentioned in the chat early on, those are not recorded. So that's also why we do the breakout room, so that you can maybe more comfortably, or just be able to have the space to have the fully free dialogue around these vulnerable topics. But yes, exactly. What happens here stays here. Are there any other guideposts that others would like to include?
Yeah, it it's kind of like threaded through all of these. Probably mostly with the respect that somebody is speaking. And if we're going to be active listeners, we actually have to listen to them and allow them and not interrupt or add on. That's hard to do.
I love that. And I want to and that one. So listening to receive rather than listening to just respond.
Yeah. It's like 3 levels of listening. It could be listening to be right. It could be listening to collaborate, or it could be listening to um, um, explore opportunities. But you got to listen to do it.
Yes. I think that's beautiful.
I don't want to take credit for it though. It's other training.
Let's go ahead and continue onward. And know that if at any point you think of something you want to add to a guidepost, we can always incorporate that in.
Okay, so before we dive into the resources and information that we have for you, we first want folks to check in and see what psychological safety in the workplace means to you. There are no right or wrong answers here. Psychological safety is a very broad topic, and it includes strategies, resources, but also includes a workplace culture, how people feel. It includes how we show up to work, and part of that includes who we are, our identities, our lived experience. So we want folks to have some time to check in and think about what psychological safety means to you all. And this is going to be our first breakout room. So we're going to try and set those up. If technology is on our side today, and we'll give you about 5 minutes for this. And our goal is about 3 people per breakout room, but there might be a breakout room with an extra person.
I did it. It looks like it's just 3 in each.
Oh, perfect.
So for those watching the recording, you're obviously not going in a breakout room. If you could just take this time to work on the activity that they'll share in a moment.
All right, it looks like we have folks coming back to the space. We'll give everyone just a moment. Oh, oopsie, that does happen, doesn't it, Alyssa? No problem at all. All the little tech fun. All right, so as we are landing back here, we want to flush out some of those conversations that you had, and we're going to utilize Mentimeter. Maybe this is a tool you have utilized before, or it might be the very first time, but there's a couple of ways you can join us. If you have a cell phone device, you are welcome to scan that QR code. If not a cell phone, or if you like, I don't do this whole QR thing, no problem. You can go to menti.com, which is noted right at the top, and then use the code 22192646, which we can also put into the chat. Actually, China, by chance, do you have easier access to grab that link in the chat and toss it in there? Wonderful. And then once you get there, you'll have the chance to just type in a few words reflecting on when you think of psychological safety, what words, phrases, or understanding comes to mind. And then hopefully all of that is going to start populating onto the shared screen.
I'm gonna unmute for a second. When I scan the QR code, a different question pops up, and it seems like it's something that would be more towards the end of the training.
Oh no,
I
I
have
wonder.
the same thing too.
Okay, so
Okay,
it's not just me.
it is not just you. I don't know why it's grabbing the wrong QR code, but I did have a backup plan. So try that QR code.
I think there's something in the universe right now with technology, just not something with the stars.
Yay, it's
That works.
working.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for your grace. We are testing out Mentimeter and we appreciate you all.
You're testing out psychological safety.
This too. Look at it grow. One thing with this particular app is that the more that a particular word or phrase is utilized, the larger it will become. So we can see the connections happening right here live in front of us with the 20 responses we have already. Beautiful.
Oh, are you going to
Miss Lau-
share these with us too?
What's that?
That would be nice if you could share these. I have to report. What's this about? I have to bring this back to my managing director. That's what it's about right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we can definitely get like an image of this sent out. Also, feel free if you tech-wise like to do screenshots, you're welcome to do that here, but we'll also get this shared out too.
And I don't think we mentioned this, you will get a copy of the slides as well.
Thank you, China. All
So
right.
that'll be in the slides, right, China?
This one will
Yeah,
probably be a
yeah.
separate image.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right, thanks.
because we're making it live. You all are making the training right now, so this is why we're so excited.
Wow. You know, it's so interesting seeing the words that are really happening here. I mean, we very obviously have some things right in the middle, that validation, valued, respect. But then there's also some words that are like really similar, like understood and understanding, um, being seen, connection, being heard.
I like just the simple real. The to me that brings up authenticity, being genuine, with the opposite of that being fake, being performative, kind of fake it till you make it. I could have so many different thoughts just from that one word.
Beautiful. So I just flipped back to our presentation. I love what was just shared into the chat. Sometimes people forget that everyone is still a real human and humans make mistakes. Did anyone put imperfection? That would have that's just been, we didn't, but I feel like that would be a good one on here. Imperfection being a part of psychological safety. We always think of imperfection as like, it has that negative connotation, but it's actually really important, right? Humanity. Lovely. All right, we're going to keep holding on to this and we're going to come back to it at the end. Spoiler alert, y'all kind of already saw where we're going at the very end, but that's okay. All right.
Yeah, I see. I'm seeing another comment in the chat, so I'm loving these two comments together. Sometimes people forget that everyone is still a real human and humans make mistakes. And I say this often, we are humans, not robots. Human error is real and how we learn. Absolutely, again, being real, we're real human beings. And as Paige said, we can't learn and grow if we are not being imperfect and making mistakes and reflecting on them and improving on them. And we're going to dive into this a little bit further throughout the training. So if you still have some words that are popping up, put them in the chat. We want to capture them. If we don't want you to lose them if you feel really passionate about them. Right now, we have a quick story. So I am going to read this story. It's just a few paragraphs, and we want to hear folks' thoughts after. So this is a story from an article called What is Psychological Safety? And you will receive the sources when you receive the slides. Okay, so this is the story that was shared in the article. No one likes to deliver bad news to their boss, but that's exactly what I had to do when a project I'd been working on wasn't delivering the results we expected. I'd been a big advocate for our team taking on the initiative, and personally, I'd invested a lot of time into it. And I convinced others to do the same. When I met with my manager to present the data, which showed that we hadn't recouped our investment and the initiative had performed worse than planned, I was nervous. I would have understood if she had been frustrated or even angry, and I expected her to at least ask what went wrong or how could we have prevented this. Both are questions I had prepared my answers for. Instead, she asked a simple question. What did you learn? So I want to pause and give some space for folks to reflect. How did this story make you feel? What are your reactions to this? Please unmute or share your thoughts in the chat.
Seeing some comments coming into the chat. It's important to keep in mind that the safe space we want is what we also need to give to someone. It's that grace again. Just now, as I was thinking about this story, I was thinking about how learning is key. And I was watching this short video on, gosh, I don't know if it was a presentation or just a classroom, but the person presenting was talking about how there's the point of not knowing and the point of having the knowledge about the thing, and everything in between, the ups, downs, in, outs, curves, that's all the learning space. And sometimes being in that learning space is very uncomfortable. But in order to get to the learned knowledge, we have to have tolerance of being in that discomfort, which also means the vulnerability to sit with that discomfort in order to do the learning. And the greater our capacity becomes to sit in that discomfort, the more capacity we have for learning. And to me, learning is key. And creating a space where learning is allowed is central to psychological safety. Because curiosity is the opposite of blame. Melissa shared in the chat. I
Wow.
say one.
I'm
Great.
sorry. I want to hear that again. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I really want to hear what you said. What was it with learning is the opposite? What was that?
Curiosity is the opposite of blame.
I want to
Thanks, Jen.
validate that, Beth, because when I first read curiosity is the opposite of blame, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. Like I was like, wow, this could apply to so many things, and even just yes, psychological safety, but also just person to person, human to human. If you choose curiosity over blame, that is a call in rather than calling someone out. And curiosity is how we learn and grow. So if we're choosing blame, we're cutting off that opportunity to follow that path and see where we can learn and improve situations, improve procedures, improve the way that things take place in the workplace. If we are choosing blame, we are giving up that opportunity. I think we can go to the next slide.
Absolutely. And there's something else too, right before we move to the next slide, that I want to also acknowledge in this space, and that is that we are talking about psychological safety, and we all have a lot of curiosity around that and passion. And we want to acknowledge that psychologically safe work environments are actually quite rare. So it's unfortunately, it's not the standard. We want to change that.
Thank you, Paige. So we have some different definitions that can paint part of the picture of psychological safety. Again, you all helped us define it. There's so much that goes into psychological safety. So I'm going to read the quote here for accessibility. The psychological safety is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. I do see another comment in the chat that I want to uplift. Failure. We are all afraid of failing or being seen as a failure. The supervisor was compassionate by just asking, "What did you learn?" Failure equals lesson learned. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm seeing the connection from our word cloud, and just the discussion seems to keep building on, but we are all human, and if a mistake happens, which it will happen, psychological safety provides tools for how we choose to take a path after failure or risk-taking that doesn't go well. And we're going to talk about this throughout the training, but this quote mentions interpersonal risk-taking. Psychological safety is so broad that it includes the interpersonal risk-taking. It includes peer-to-peer. It absolutely includes between a supervisor or a leader and someone who is lower in seniority or rank. We're going to talk about that as well. But there are so many different interactions and opportunities for psychological safety at an organization. And so that is partially why it makes it difficult and why a truly psychologically safe organization is rare. But this also means that there are so many opportunities and places to start to make changes at your organization.
We also want to talk about why it's so important, and that is that the benefits and the impacts that psychological safety has. It leads to team members feeling more engaged in their work and more motivated because they feel and they know that their contributions matter, and they know that they can share and speak up without fear of like retaliation or retribution, such as like being able to have a healthy boundary in the workplace. Again, we'll dive deeper into that. But then also when it comes to other areas of the work, including having a say in decision making, being a part of the voice. Speaking of decision making, Stronger and better decision making is cultivated as people feel more comfortable voicing their opinions and their concerns. And that also enables a more diverse range of perspectives being heard and being considered. It's also really important to recognize that psychological safety doesn't mean that we're leaving behind or skipping accountability. Instead, think about psychological safety as eliminating the fear of showing up and being able to take a risk in order to lessen anxiety, which then creates the motivation and the ability to lean into learning, which, according to many experts, including Dr. Edmondson, who we have cited on the slide, is the same space as high performance. So as we create spaces of learning, we are creating spaces of high performance.
Thank you. I have another comment in the chat I want to uplift. A challenge is that lack of safety is passed down like generational trauma. Hurt people, hurting people. This is real. This is valid. Thank you for sharing that. That is really something so powerful that touches on what makes it so difficult to have a psychologically safe workplace. I mean, think about all of us. I mean, many of us here are social workers or have training in being trauma informed, but there is so much complexity to the workplace, to the systems that we work in, and the fact that we are all individuals with our own lived experience and our own lives, it makes it more difficult to create a psychologically safe workplace. So it doesn't matter that we all know what being trauma informed is. Are there competing forces? Are there systems in place that are impacting our ability to create the safe workplace? And one of you mentioned this earlier in the training, the issue of time, just time alone. So we live in a capitalist society that says that we want to maximize the amount of work that we can get done in every minute. And also that is important. We want to be efficient with our resources so we can help as many people as possible. But there's so many competing forces just alone in time that make it hard for us to work in a psychologically safe space. And we have another quote here I'm going to read for accessibility. Psychological safety at work doesn't mean that everybody is nice to each other all the time. It means that people feel free to brainstorm out loud, voice half-finished thoughts, openly challenge the status quo, share feedback, and work through disagreements together. So tying back to the quote on the previous slide, where Paige shared that a psychologically safe workplace doesn't mean that everyone is perfect. It doesn't mean that everyone happens to be high performers. It means that people work together in the imperfection and feel safe to do so, to create feedback loops of learning and growing and investing in each other. And that only happens when we feel comfortable sharing our voice, sharing our thoughts, and sharing feedback with each other. And Beth, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, as a time constraint, if we make workplaces safe, we will save so much wasted time from drama. It really is a time saver. It really is. It's a time saver. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Beth. That's so powerful. Um, that's there's kind of a conundrum there because a lot of aspects of workplace culture prioritize maximizing efficiency, profits, how many outcomes, how many objectives you've reached, how many people you serve. So sometimes the belief is if we remove the human element and maximize the productivity, it will be more efficient. But with workplace drama and miscommunication, and that quickly becomes something that takes up a lot of our time and resources. And so even earlier in our training, Paige and I thought it was valuable to spend 15 minutes just on guideposts. We thought that was important to the training, to the 4 hours we have here. And we were intentional about that. But often the default is to not focus on the human side, focus on the connection and go right into the work. Energy zapper. We have some hand clapping emojis and in the comments, and we also have love work through disagreements together. Yes, absolutely. And I think this will come up later, but the idea of how do disagreements get worked through at your organization? Do they get worked through? Who's involved in that? Is it very siloed for some folks? Or do they have access to other minds that they can collaborate with and seek guidance with? So again, psychological safety does not mean it is a nice place or everyone is nice to each other. It means that learning and messing up and pointing out mistakes, even though it's uncomfortable and it feels risky, it feels doable to the people at your organization. And the key to that is a safe environment without severe negative consequences. And this does involve the individual risk of every person at an organization. There's no one cookie cutter fix for everyone. This is what makes it so challenging. But if we can meet people where they're at and raise the minimum level of comfort and risk taking, that grows the organization as a whole.
The last thing we want to share here is that we also know that if a psychologically safe workplace hasn't been established, then we also know that practicing things like the self-care that's needed to mitigate and prevent things like burnout becomes not only challenging, but nearly impossible. So we want to add another word into the phrase psychological safety, as we have on the slide here, which is team psychological safety, in recognition that it is not only individual, as China was sharing on our last slide. So this is the shared belief held by members of a team that it is okay to take risks, to express their ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. So it can't just be one person and a colleague, or one person with their supervisor. Team psychological safety needs multiple people, multiple perspectives, and diverse perspectives.
Thank you. So the reason we've included a specific slide on team psychological safety is because there's specific research on psychological safety, and it shows that the team that you work in is very important to your overall feeling of psychological safety at your organization. One aspect of that research is that there seems to be there's some research that supports that it's most effective if you have folks meet in groups of 3, because then they can have the right amount of time to share their voices, but it's not too big of a group where they think, you know what, for what I'm saying is not important for the amount of time we have, I'm not going to share, or I don't feel comfortable sharing. So we did try to incorporate that in the training by having you meet in groups of 3. But something I want to highlight about team psychological safety is, and I mentioned this on the previous slide, but who is your team? What does that look like at your own organization? Who do you have shared tasks with? Who do you meet with regularly? And you might have multiple teams at your organization. But something that I found in my previous work when I worked in housing was that it's often very siloed. So if you are a case manager, maybe you have a case conferencing team, or maybe you go directly to your lead case manager, your supervisor, but are there other opportunities where you are on a team at your organization where you can share ideas and share thoughts, or folks are giving feedback on how to help one another? And then also along with that, with what's your team look like? What does accountability look like? Is accountability shared? Is there support there? Do you know that your supervisor will have your back? Do you know that if there is a task that your program or your department is trying to do, is there shared accountability with folks can lean on each other, support one another? We want to hear from folks, or you can just pause and reflect as well. What does your team look like? And are there multiple teams at your organization? How does collaboration look? What does isolation look like? And what is the aspect of accountability there?
I just wanted to let folks know that if they chat one of us one-on-one, we can read their comment anonymously, since we're asking them to talk about people that might also be in this call.
Yes, thank you. And then also, please feel free to use examples from a previous organization, or examples that you know from a colleague or someone else in your movement. Alexandria, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so in my organization, my team specifically actually works with a few other teams for collaborative efforts. We're in homeless services, supportive housing and homeless services. But the main collaboration we have is actually with the city of Detroit. Once a month, all of our outreach teams get together for like a technical assistance meeting or like a work group. Because they all work different shifts, we all have different clients, so it's a great space to get together and really talk about the things that are happening in our community that might not be happening directly to our team yet. So it really gives all of us an opportunity to hear what's going on in different areas of our community, and an opportunity to kind of get to know one another on different teams. And it's a really, really great space. It can get a little emotional sometimes because the work is heavy, but the city and all of the organizations that come to this meeting are really, really great at making sure that everyone feels psychologically safe. Because there are some very, very hard things that we're seeing and dealing with. And just knowing that everyone's there with an open mind and an open ear, really, honestly, it's probably my favorite meeting every single month, if I'm being honest. But I just wanted to share that.
I love that so much. I really appreciate you sharing. That's such a great example of bringing together folks that have a similar role and can provide expertise to each other because they know what the role looks like and what the challenges are. And then also just hearing that it's your favorite meeting. And then we have comments in the chat. I will say my boss is great with collaboration. If he comes to me with an idea, I know I can speak freely and tell him, hey, I don't like how this is, or I don't agree with this. And he will listen to me and we will work to come to an understanding. I love that. So we want folks to take away from this training the idea of thinking intentionally about what teams look like at your organization and how you can improve psychological safety by thinking about teams. So are there not enough teams? Are there teams that within their structure don't have psychological safety or need some improvement? Are there ways that you can create human connection and collaboration and create shared accountability? There are a lot of different strategies that you can use, and every organization is going to look different.
And of course, we're going to hear about some of those strategies, right?
Yes.
I'll add on into your bucket of addressing this. We have unofficial teams, and these unofficial teams actually have conflict between teams. And that's one of the challenges that we have to get through. So we have to establish safe teams and safe interaction of teams. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that into space because, again, psychological safety is so broad. It includes interactions between two people, and then it includes the resource scarcity, the politics of different departments, different programs, different leaders, who your supervisor is. A lot of that is horizontal hostility and a psychologically unsafe work environment. And so we could go so much further into that. But I will say that in nonprofit, we do see a lot that there is inconsistency between which program gets which funding. Is it state? Is it local? Is it federal? This program can afford new laptops. This program cannot. We have a whole training on horizontal hostility, and we spend a whole day on it. But that is absolutely part of psychological safety. And so later in the training, which is my key phrase today, apparently, we're going to talk about some strategies and starting points for how to address psychological safety because it is so intertwined into workplace culture, the history of the organization, the challenges that have come up in the past. People hold on to that, and then also workplace policies and procedures. Again, we could keep training on this forever. Paige and I had to narrow it down. But thank you again, Beth. I think we can go on to the next slide. Yep. Okay, so some of these we touched on, but there's a lot of research on psychological safety. And so here's some reasons why it is essential. It enhances employee engagement and motivation. You're not only going to get better outcomes, but folks are going to feel empowered and connected to their work. They're going to feel more successful, and that connects to how folks feel in terms of support and workplace stress and stress about their workload. This also relates to staff burnout. And then something that was shared earlier is because of the work that we do, there's burnout and there's stress, but there's also that additional layer of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma and all of the things that we hold on to while we're serving the folks that we serve. And so it's even more important that we are reducing the stress and harm that folks are experiencing in the workplace while they are working to serve folks that are in crisis. And Paige, are there any here that you want to highlight and or that are your favorites?
I love that question. I think one of my favorite aspects of why psychological safety is essential is how it creates creativity. It invites that. And we know that performance is dependent on creativity, and how psychological safety boosts this productivity and that enhancement to retention. And it truly does lessen burnout, which of course ultimately decreases staff turnover. Yes, back to the creativity is the opposite of blame. Always coming back to that. But people who feel psychologically safe, they recognize that candor and creativity and vulnerability are not only welcome in their workspace, but that they are essential in their workplace. And I think on this note, China, did you have another thing you wanted to add?
No, I think you're going where I'm going, so I'll let you finish.
A break? Yes, indeed. I think that it would make sense for us to take our first 10-minute break at this time.
Sounds good. I am going to pause the recording for the 10-minute break, but I do encourage folks watching the recording to take a 10-minute break.
Yes, thank you for that reminder, Allison. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you were able to enjoy your break and fully utilize it. I hope nothing came up. I know how life works sometimes. We are gonna get back into it. And reminder, we will have another 10-minute break later in the training. So on this slide, we have a diagram called the impact of intersectionality. Intersectionality is a term that was named by the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, and so we want to credit her. She was a Black woman, and she coined the term intersectionality in 1989. She created this term to illustrate the multi-layered oppression that women of color face. Intersectionality theory is the study of how different power structures interact in the lives of people who hold marginalized identities, and it's connected to how all of our different identities come together. And I have one other acknowledgement for Crenshaw. So while she did formally coin the term intersectionality, she notes in every generation and in every intellectual sphere and in every political movement, there have been African American women who have articulated the need to think and talk about race through a lens that looks at gender, or think and talk about feminism through a lens that looks at race. We include this slide on intersectionality in every training that we do at the coalition because this is tied to every aspect of our work. We cannot serve every survivor, serve every person seeking services that is in crisis or experiencing trauma or in need of housing services. If they're experiencing homelessness, we cannot serve them best if we are not considering their lived experience and their different identities and how those identities interact with the systems in place in this country. And in this diagram, we have a person in the center, and we have some identities, some kinds of identities that are all alongside this person. So types of identities, we have our occupation, education status, race, ethnicity, religion, language, heritage, history, immigration status, gender, family status, income, Native American or First Nation identity, ability or disability, geographic location, age, sexuality, and there are so many other identities that are not listed here. But we have to recognize that folks have a unique lived experience based on all of their identities coming together. Some identities may hold privilege when interacting with systems every day. Some identities may experience harm or marginalization. And we need to recognize that when we're trying to serve folks. And we also need to recognize that all of our employees and colleagues come to the workplace with their own lived experience. And a workplace cannot be psychologically safe if folks that have marginalized identities or are underrepresented do not feel safe there because of their identities. A quote that I want to uplift is, psychological safety isn't just about creating a space where people feel comfortable sharing ideas or admitting mistakes. It's about ensuring that people feel safe existing and that their identity won't put them at risk in the workplace, in their neighborhoods, or in society. So whatever strategies you take back to your workplace, please know that diversity, equity, inclusion, and thinking of folks that have marginalized identities is a part of the solution for making your workplace more psychologically safe. And I have another quote here I'd like to highlight. Psychological safety can increase employee participation, but by embracing and understanding intersectionality, the quality of insights and representation increases exponentially. And oh, perfect, perfect segue. You knew, Paige, right when to go to the next slide. That goes into my next point is intersectionality, diversity, inclusion is something that helps everyone, not just those with the most marginalized identities. If an organization shows that they are providing safety to folks that are most vulnerable at that organization, that uplifts everyone and makes everyone feel more comfortable. In addition, we are benefiting from the unique insight of having a diverse team of folks with all different backgrounds. And on this slide here, we have an illustration that Paige and I both love. So this is the cultural iceberg. And so the common phrase is that with an iceberg, whatever you see on the top, there's often much more of the iceberg below the water that you can't see. And so on the top of the iceberg, which is easy to see, we have how people dress, their language, their music, their literature, stereotypes, food, holidays, festivals, and important symbols and icons. But below the surface, which is less easy to see, we have so many more parts of someone's identity that are less obvious or less visible or less apparent. So we have colonialism, the history of our country. How has that impacted this person's experience? Someone mentioned earlier generational trauma. Generational trauma is absolutely linked to our identities and how those identities have historically been treated in this country, because those elements of our country's history are still embedded in the systems today that folks interact with. We have so many different aspects of culture underneath the surface. We have core values, manners, gestures, biases, their family role. Are they a parent to little kids, or are they a pet parent, a dog mom, a plant mom? Family values, relationship to work and rest, personal space, approaches to health and medicine. There are so many different aspects of who we are, and if we make it a safer space for everyone to be their authentic self, we are creating a safer environment, which in turn creates more opportunities for that innovation, that creativity, that shared learning, the feedback given to each other. And we know that is the key to learning, as we've been discussing throughout the training. Paige?
Yeah, I think the other thing I really love about this visualization is that, and you mentioned a couple of them, but in the easy to see part of the iceberg, we have all of those core components of the iceberg. And then when we come underneath the water here to the difficult to see, not only do we have all those components that are within that iceberg, but if we look around the edges where we have like the the little octopus and the shark and the little piece of coral and the anchor, we see those other components that also are around and surrounding that iceberg and that have an impact on it. So like the bigger cultural components like media representation, word of mouth, gossip, the drama that we're talking about, all of those kinds of things, the global issues. So like it's not an individual thing or an isolated, it is this full sense. Are you not seeing a picture right now? Yes, you absolutely should be seeing a picture. And my screen does say it's sharing.
I see it.
You see it? Okay.
I can see the picture.
Okay. Okay.
I'll try and put it in the chat.
Thank you, China.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing when you're having a struggle of seeing something on the screen. So hopefully we can get that resolved for you. So this image really is a representation that is central to psychological safety, because psychological safety needs marginalized identities to be protected and uplifted. We talked earlier about bringing in the diverse perspectives and how key those are. because this uplifts everyone to be their authentic and candid selves with all of these layered aspects, not only those within the marginalized identities themselves, but everybody is impacted. There's another quote we wanted to uplift here, and that is, every time we withhold our thoughts, we rob ourselves and our colleagues of small moments of learning. That one really landed with me.
To that I say, ooh.
Ooh, indeed. Thank you. Yes. So when we don't have this, innovation gets stunted. And in order to bring all of our skills, our knowledge, our insights, and our creativity, we need to be able to show up as our whole authentic selves. And it means we have to feel safe showing up as our whole authentic selves. So this absolutely means DEI, and it means lifting up marginalized and underrepresented identities. And even further, this means all of the other qualities that make us unique. If it is safe, we can show up as our whole selves. Again, it benefits everyone at an organization in terms of creativity, expertise, lived experiences, and shared learning. Coming back to that shared learning.
Paige, you said something very powerful about showing up as our whole authentic selves. And that takes me all the way back to our word cloud where someone typed the word real. And again, I'm still thinking about it because we also had a lot of comments in the chat that talked about people are not robots. People are humans. People make mistakes. Well, for now, everyone that works at your organization is a human. So who knows with AI. But I really want to uplift that because, again, there is a default in our culture because many of the ideas for how a workplace should look in nonprofit come from for-profit. And that is comes from running a business and trying to make a profit and maximize and products or services to be the most efficient as possible. And so by default, the system does not want us to include that human element. But if we can include the fact that everyone that works at our organization is a human with their own lives and their own lived experience, if they can just show up as themselves and as their authentic selves, then we're going to get less burden on their part because they don't have to hide certain aspects of who they are, but we're also going to benefit from all of the creativity and unique perspective that they can bring. And there was a quote that I saw that I wanted to share here, and it's just not necessarily a quote, but the phrase that we often hear of leave your personal life at the door. And that is an example of how we try to take the human out of our work. And so we're operating in a space where we have to remove that aspect of us and go right into work and be ready to be productive and just focus on the work. We're missing out on human connection, even if it's just that 5 minutes like we did at the beginning of this training. We could have started the training 5 minutes earlier, but we spent 5 minutes to learn all these amazing facts about each other, and it really didn't take a lot of time. But now we have so many connections going and possibly a book club that's going to be started. So what are the ways that we can bring the human connection back into our workplace and show that we respect each other, we care about each other as a whole person that they are, we see them, and we want them to feel like they can be their authentic self. Before we move on, are there any questions or comments that folks had for this section? Okay. This is a book. This is from a book that we wanted to uplift. It's called Inclusion with Purpose. And so you will get this source when you get the slides, but to continue our conversation on intersectionality, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we want to uplift the research that has been done about psychological safety in the workplace and how it relates to identities. So specifically, this research connects to psychologically unsafe workplace cultures for women of color. So again, the intersection of holding an identity of being a woman and a person of color. So the research came up with 4 signs to show that an organization does not have a safe workplace culture for women of color. First, there is a lack of safe mechanisms to report bias. Next, women of color are penalized for speaking up. White comfort is prioritized, and employees of color are penalized for speaking up about issues that disproportionately impact their communities. There is a lack of advocacy for staff of marginalized identities who are impacted by racism and systemic oppression. These are some characteristics of a workplace culture where it is not psychologically safe for women of color. Again, we cannot emphasize enough that part of psychological safety and improving psychological safety means that the work environment must be improved for folks that experience harm, marginalization, folks that do not have representation. And so what we have next is we have some time here. We want you to spend a few minutes journaling, and we want you to think about how this looks at your organization. So this is an independent journal. You do not have to read the journal out loud. We want you to think about how staff of color or other marginalized identities are treated when they speak up at your organization. So we're going to give 3 minutes 3 to 5 minutes for folks. We'll check in to see if you need more time. And Paige put the question in the chat, thank you. And feel free to go off camera while you're journaling.
Thank you for taking a few minutes to journal. And if you're still writing, that's all right. The last thing we want to mention here is that organizations and teams that work on improving psychological safety for everyone tend to become more inclusive as a result. So with that, there are 7 keys to determine if psychological safety exists for our team. So these look like asking yourself, if you make a mistake on this team, it's not held against you. So if you ask yourself, can I make a mistake on this team or is it held against me? And the answer is no, that is a flag to keep in mind. The second one is members of this team can bring up problems and tough issues. Again, so doing a self-inquiry of that. The third, people on this team accept others for being different. 4, it is safe to take a risk on this team. 5, it isn't difficult to ask other members of this team for help. 6, no one on this team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. And 7, working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. So these are some considerations for whether we're creating and promoting a psychologically safe environment within our agencies. So it's asking, are we promoting a culture of care and support within our teams, or are we creating an environment of fear and anxiety rather than team effort and collaboration and mutual respect for one another's strengths and client-centered, survivor-centered efforts or not? China, do you have additions to add?
Yeah, I want
I had a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm wondering like what you think about if like people ask these at like a staff meeting. Like not that people are gonna, I don't know, be super open, but like a poll or something, or if you think that's asking people to be too vulnerable, just get a
So
gauge of how people are feeling in, in the team or the agency or whatever you're looking at.
it can be a tool. I would say this is not something you introduce like as a one and done. So this is something that you would want to periodically check in about and work on. And they might have used a survey with these questions to get feedback on these specific points. But they did mention in the article that these are subjective to each individual. So something like it is safe to take a risk on this team is going to be very individual to each person and their feeling of risk, the role that they're in. And so if you were to do a survey with all of these points, you'd want to look for the overall trends and you would want to check in periodically and you would want to triple check that it is anonymous and communicate that. And then also part of psychological safety would be transparency and ethical communication. So when it's being introduced and brought into the space, having the reason behind it and the intention is powerful too. Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you. Oh, yes.
I'm still thinking about it too. I don't know that I have an exact answer in terms of like the setup, but I do think what China has said about making sure to communicate the reasoning, the why, and introducing it is important. So, for example, I'm thinking about if I if I was at an organization and I was wondering or questioning if psychologically safety exists and wasn't already feeling like I was experiencing that, what would it look like to bring this into a space? Things I would want to be thinking about are what power dynamics exist here, particularly in my role as the one introducing this into the space. Because I want to minimize the dynamics in terms of like particularly if I'm in a position of power, like I'm a supervisor of a bunch of people in the space, what does it look like to have that conversation when it could be feedback towards my leadership and my supervision style in that space, which I would, of course, I would hope would be able to be there. But if I have been a part of creating that space that maybe is questionable in the psychological safety, how real are those answers? So the anonymity potential could be a way to flesh that out. And I have seen orgs utilize like almost a mediator to have these conversations with staff members. In order to create and to work on rebuilding psychological safety in spaces. Beth, I see your hand up.
Yeah, it just would using what'd you call it, the guidepost, ouch, where somebody you're welcoming them and you're inviting them to say, hey, if I say something and you don't, all you got to do is say ouch.
Yes. Yes, that is where if we have built in those tools and components and created that space of being able to utilize that ouch language, it could be really impactful in a space like this. Mhm.
Wow. Thank you.
Mhm. Another question that was coming up that was just shared directly with me, so it'll stay anonymous as to where that came from, is what might it look like and how do we address if our board is promoting non-safe space?
Did you say that again?
I can. The question that was brought up, and I'm just posing it out into this space to gather now. So my intention of sharing this question out in space is to have a conversation around it. The question is, what if a board is promoting non-safe space? How do we address that?
One thing that I have found to be effective is, as a director who immediately reports to our board, it is a priority of the organization and internally with all staff that we do have a safe space, and that we also have, a culture of respect in the way in which we communicate. And so in cases where we have had issues in that needing to be addressed before, I've brought it back to the organization it leads with this, creating a space that is welcome and all, and is also respectful. We actually have within our board packet at the top of every board or committee meeting, and it's gonna, the name is going to escape me as exactly what we call it right now, but it's a disclosure. It's it's essentially a disclaimer of like respectful, speaking respectfully to one another, the way that we communicate, etc. In a moment, of course, when I'm done talking, the name of it will come back. So I'll put it in the message. But that's been something that's really helpful because it starts every single board or committee meeting with, that acknowledgement. And then it also is, if we've had those situations come up in the past as well, I've felt comfortable to say, the same way that we would have expectations of staff and employees of this organization, we have that, and it almost feels like we have that bit of backing, right? But I also think, and this is my personality, so this comes easy to me, and not to say it will for all, but I also believe that when we lead with that, we're demonstrating the greater strength and holding the people above us accountable. And so it makes it a little easier for me to have confidence to say that, because ultimately, what would one ever say? Oh, no, we want to communicate with people disrespectfully. And the reality is people know when they're in the wrong, and we can professionally and respectfully redirect that and correct that and bring that to light in a way. But ultimately, you've hired a director, or at whatever level of leadership one might be that's interacting with a board, you've hired somebody that you're looking to as a leader. And what greater ability than to, in sometimes uncomfortable situations, remind leaders of all levels of what our responsibility is. So just my piece there.
I love that. There's so much wisdom in that. And being able to, whether it's guideposts that are at the beginning of every meeting, maybe it's like the core competencies of an org, maybe it's the mission and vision and values that are at the top, that are that cementing and that reminder of these are our shared values that we are always going to lean back into and to uphold that shared vision. And that then enables what Becca is talking about, is to hold others accountable to that vision. That's lovely.
I'm loving all the discussion that we're having, and this is bringing me back to how important it is to uplift voices, because we need folks to share feedback, share their thoughts. That sharing and connection and trust is what psychological safety is. But I want to uplift the other side of it. So psychological safety means uplifting folks so they feel comfortable sharing. But in tandem with that, alongside that and back and forth with that, is how is the feedback received once it's shared. And so Allison shared a great example about using this language in a survey to gauge psychological safety at your organization. And absolutely, that is something you can do, but it's tied to the history of the organization, the workplace culture, the leadership. And there's a common thing that happens in the work that we do where we think, oh, we'll send out a survey to the people that we serve or our community partners, or our funders send us surveys. But sometimes there's survey fatigue. And also in this context, if there's a history where people have given their feedback and they have taken that time and it hasn't, it seems like it just went in a drawer to never be addressed, or they didn't feel like results came from that, then they're considering that when they fill out this survey. And so it's very complicated, but that's why I want to emphasize that this is a iterative process. It's a give and a take and a give and a take over and over again, and it's going to take a lot of time. But there are a lot of starting points that you can use. And I love the declaration of civil discourse in the chat. That's a great example. And that reminds me, there is a space that I am in where they start the meeting with their own guideposts, and they call them agreements, but they are similar to what we discussed today. And we do it every meeting. We've been doing it for 2 years, and it only takes 10 minutes, but it makes a huge difference. Are there any other thoughts that folks would like to share while we're on the slide before we move to the next part?
All right. So let's begin to put this into practice, identifying. What we're going to do with this first part of a scenario is watch a short video illustrating a workplace psychological safety scene. And our ask is for you to pay attention to any red flags you might see. You might want to have a scrap piece of paper or a Word doc pulled up to keep track of these, because we're going to get into groups and talk about these and such later. So I'm going to type into the chat. Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead and watch the video together. Welcome to the Community Healing Alliance, a nonprofit organization focused on providing advocacy services to underserved communities. The team is dedicated, but struggles with internal issues affecting their psychological safety. This is Maria, a new program manager, and she has noticed the current outreach strategy isn't reaching the target population. Let's join Maria to take a look at a work situation that she faced. As we join her, consider any red flags regarding Maria and her team's psychological safety. She decides to propose a new, innovative approach during a team meeting. Despite her nervousness in presenting something so different while also being so new to the team, she shares her idea in hopes of it being well received and that it will make a positive impact for colleagues and clients. After the meeting, Maria realizes more data to support the proposal is needed, so she reaches out to her colleague, Tom, who has experience with data analysis, to ask for his help. Tom agrees to help, but he seems reluctant and busy with his own tasks. With Tom's help, Maria gathers the data and begins implementing the new outreach strategy. However, due to a miscalculation, the strategy doesn't yield the immediate expected results and outreach numbers begin to drop. Maria quickly informs her supervisor about the error, hoping to learn from it and improve. But instead of receiving constructive feedback, Maria is met with harsh criticism from her supervisor. She's blamed for the failure and is publicly reprimanded in front of her colleagues at their next team meeting. This public shaming makes Maria feel humiliated and discouraged from taking any future risks. After the meeting, Maria notices that her colleagues, including Tom, start to avoid her. They stop inviting her to informal team discussions, and they exclude her from collaborative projects. Some team members even gossip about her mistake, further isolating her. Maria overhears comments like, "I knew her idea wouldn't work," and "She should have stuck to the original plan. She's so new here. It's no wonder the plan didn't work." The combined negative responses from both her supervisor and her team members create a hostile work environment for Maria. She feels isolated, unsupported, and fearful of making any further contributions. The lack of psychological safety stifles her creativity and her willingness to take risks, ultimately affecting her performance and well-being. Let's take time now to reflect back on the 7 keys to determine if psychological safety exists for Maria and the team at Community Healing Alliance. What red flags can you identify? Okay, so this is where we're going to go into our next small group breakout session. Our hope is that you can go into the same ones you were in earlier. However, if that doesn't quite work out, it'll just still be 2 to 3 people per group. China, how long do we want folks in these small groups to talk through the 7 keys and Maria's experience?
We are going to give 10 minutes and we'll check in the chat, and if folks are saying they need more time, then we'll give more time.
And those watching the recording, use this 10 minutes to think about it yourselves.
And can folks in the breakout room see the main chat?
No, we'll have to have Allison do it's called like it's not a shout out, but
Broadcast.
that's the word. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
So we're back.
We are back.
Oh man, was that
Wow.
10 minutes?
No, I
Um,
cut it short by 2. It was my mistake.
Okay.
Sometimes the conversation goes so quickly, it's like, where did the time go? But no, that was on us. But we're going to talk about it here in this space anyway. So wherever you may have left off, we'd like to hear from some of you around some of the flags that were coming up. What were some of the things you were discussing in your breakout groups? Alexandria, go for it.
In our breakout group, we talked about some of the more obvious things, but one thing that wasn't super obvious to me that was kind of a red flag was when, I don't remember the main character's name, but when she had this thought of a new idea to change some things on her team, she did not bring that to her supervisor right off the bat. Not saying in like a chain of command way, but as a support. And I thought that was interesting because, from my position, I have a team underneath me and then a team of leadership above me. And if I want to make changes, even if I have quote unquote the authority to do that, my first instinct is to go to my leadership and share that idea with them for feedback or maybe some brainstorming to maybe make my idea even better. So I thought it was interesting that she went straight to someone who knew about the data versus going to her supervisor. It made me think maybe she wasn't the most comfortable with her supervisor.
Very keen observations. What else did folks see and pick up on? Feel free to unmute. Or type in the chat. Both are options.
I thought I saw a hand up.
So
Whoever,
did I. Let it
What-
disappear.
Yep, so feel free to unmute if you want to share.
Ouch. That observation, I don't know who shared that, but thank you. That observation was keen.
Which one?
About not instinctively going to their supervisor, and maybe because it wasn't safe. That that's an ouch. And I'm very hopeful that that can now change. Part of it is realizing it in myself, but knowing that leadership change is underway, and then maybe I won't feel that way.
Mm. Thank you for sharing.
I don't understand.
Go ahead.
Is it safe to take risks on this team? And I was wondering what kind of risks should we be willing to take, and who decides if they were if the risks are worth taking, or if it's safe. Like I mean that was a little bit I didn't get that one all the way, but we had a great conversation in our group. I think also about hearing people. If everybody, like if a big group comes to talk about something and everybody has things that need to be heard, how do they get prioritized to make the place safe and good for everybody? You know, like to still be heard, to still feel good about the environment they're working in.
Mhm.
Well, Melissa, I would like to comment as well on that is, in our group, we had talked about how basically the program manager was reprimanded in front of everyone. So that created a negative environment from there because if the top did it, then the people who was sitting under the program manager came with the same negativity after the fact, and there was no support. So psychologically, the program manager didn't have no safe zone. And if to me, if she would have started off with saying that she had these new ideas and came with the posting guidelines, even how we did this meeting, to say, hey, if there's something you would like to say or something you don't agree with or something you would like to implement as a part of this new way of how I want to do things, I think that would have been more helpful to her. And then she would have eventually had the support that she needed moving forward. Even if she failed at it, she was telling her team, we can come together and do this in a productive way with their input. And even if she was reprimanded in front of everyone, they would have then came to me on a more positive note by saying, hey, well, we can help with this, or we can try this and that. And that's where our team was with the conversation. And we even took it a step further by saying, a lot of times in work environments, if the top is not right, then the bottom is not right, because then it's behavior that is allowed.
Yeah.
So, if we're going to start a meeting off, anytime we're starting a meeting off, and if people who are sitting in that meeting do not feel the positivity of leadership, then they're not going to talk. And a lot of times the ones who do talk and have a voice, they're seen as a problem in the workplace because they don't have a problem with voicing their opinion, even if it may come off too strong, because they're voicing their opinions for other coworkers. And as we all know, there is a lot of people that don't mind voicing their opinion and where it may go to, but it is some people who look at it as those who are on top is, oh, that employee is problematic. They're always saying this or they're always saying that. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just trying to bring some light on what I noticed with that video. I felt like it just started off wrong from the get-go.
As you were sharing, you had so many people reacting with like hearts and hand clapping. It really felt like it resonated with a lot of folks here, and including myself. So many yes ands with that. Thank you. And it connected back to what like Melissa was sharing earlier. And I love that question that was also, Melissa, I'm not sure what group you were in, but the question of like, well, what kinds of risks are allowed? How do we measure that? How do we know? Yes.
There's a one that was sent to me that says the public shaming was twofold. It taught the employee and the team that mistakes are not tolerated, and also showed her colleagues it wasn't safe to take the risk of working with her, and added to her isolation. So this was
Yes.
not in the person's comment, but like, yeah, no one has spoke up yet about the fact that like they just started ostracizing her kind of, right?
Yeah.
Which is not great.
No, not great at all.
What I'm hearing from all the great comments and things that folks have shared is with these 7 keys, you need all of them. It would be very difficult to be successful with all of them and then have one not met at all. Like, if it's not safe to take a risk on this team, that's going to affect if you reach out to your team members for help, if you trust the intent of your team, if your team members value you for your unique experience. All of these aspects are connected. What are some other thoughts in the comments, or please unmute?
Yeah, Cheryl and I teamed up for our gathering, and I shared with her that one of the things that really, there were a couple of things that caught my attention, and one is that when you have, Maria was a newcomer, right? She was a newcomer, and I think when we have people that are new, they come into our teams with wonderful ideas, a lot of excitement, and just a lot of ideas. And when in situations like Maria, she came into a team that didn't know her that well, and that probably had not had an opportunity to meet with the team members. And I think that team members are important. Team members will either make it or break a project, and that it's just that simple. And I'm just wondering if the outcome for Maria would have been different if she would have included her team members versus just that one person that knew the data, right? Because they're data people, versus getting feedback from a team members that have been there the longest or have been there for a while and know how the agency or the organization runs, right? So it wouldn't have been a Maria failure. It would have been a team member failure. Okay. I think that was the first mistake that I could see, right? And then the other one, after she didn't get the outcome that she was looking for, she took it like a big girl and went to her supervisor and said, hey, listen, it didn't come out as well as it should have. Okay. And I think what was hurtful for me, and it made it quite clear that it is not safe for anybody to make a mistake within that organization or that team. A lead that shames individuals publicly, I gotta wonder what their issue is. I really do. I gotta ask if they have issues of their own for them to be doing that kind of stuff to a team member, new team member. And then for it to have been in a public space, which it tells the rest of the team, it's okay to treat people bad. It's okay to shame people public. So no wonder they didn't want to talk to her. No wonder they didn't want to, no wonder they were gossiping about her. And it just, behavior comes from the top. My belief is that behavior comes from the top. And then it trickles down. And I just felt sad for the whole situation because I think as new as we may be to a situation, we need to have a little bit of trust on those that have been there, you know, and get some feedback from them. And yeah, that was my gathering of the scenario.
Thank you so much for sharing. I saw a lot of head nods and we've got a comment in the chat. You shared a lot of great points that resonated with folks, and it resonated with me as well. I love what you said about how she was new to the organization. So every time we get new folks joining the organization, which with staff turnover, high staff turnover is frequent, that is a point where the workplace culture could change or it could be reinforced on this new person. And I think we can assume that the scenario and the supervisor and how they publicly reprimanded this person and shut down their voice, we can assume that has happened before. And so that baggage and that history that this person was going into as they started at this new organization, that was a lot that they had to jump into. And that is something to consider, is what's the history of your organization? What's the history behind the workplace culture? Because that's not going to change overnight. And a lot of folks brought this up, and I really wanted to highlight that I didn't even notice this the first time around, but the fact that she came up with an idea and thought, I've got to thoroughly research this, create a proposal, reach out to the data person, which I don't know, in housing might be the HMIS person, who is a very valuable person, but that is a very, that to me looks like individualism, and it looks like perfectionism. Like the idea has to be perfect before we share it with the team, with the leader. And how could that have been different if we felt comfortable sharing a half thought out idea, a brainstorm idea, an imperfect idea? Could her colleagues or her supervisor could been pulled in sooner to help steer that idea with the knowledge that they had being at the organization already? Different ways that could have gone. Ooh.
One of my favorite ways to have those half-formed or brainstorming sessions is to toss out a question and then say, all right, y'all, bad ideas only. Which sets the groundwork as,
That's good.
okay. And most of the time, the results have been actually not a bad idea. Or they're really like extreme ideas, right? So we're having fun, we're being playful, but it gives that permission of imperfection and to have a not fully formulated idea.
Love that.
And
Feel
I'm
free to
wondering if
take
Maria, that's just who she is, right? Like she just has perfectionist tendencies, or if like something in the agency led her to believe that like the project's all on her, she needs to do that. Cause like I didn't even see any of that as the red flags until people started talking. I was like more focused on how people were like treating her, like the boss wasn't nice to her and the colleagues. But like, why did she think that she had to show up to the meeting with like everything done on her own? Is it because there's like ambiguous expectations from leadership? Is it because they aren't specific? You know, yeah.
all very important components to creating psychological safety. What are clear expectations? Yes. Now, my hope is that this represented a pretty extreme case. That's my hope. But I'm wondering, now that we've reflected on this, what do you feel are some more subtle ways that these flags could appear in an organization?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Course. What are some subtle ways that these kinds of red flags might appear in an organization?
I think sometimes from all the different work I've had, people tend to wait until like a review to like list your mistakes, right? Instead of like when it happens, pulling you out into the hall or like coming into your office at the end of the day and being like, hey, you put that data in wrong. Like, do you need help to see how it is or whatever? And like having a conversation, but then like you're sitting down like a year later and there's just like a list of things that maybe you did wrong that no one told you. I feel like that's not like super subtle when it's happening, but it's like subtle throughout the year. But I think that's really common with managers.
That's a really good example. Not sharing more in the moment feedback or daily feedback. Others in the chat coming up being two-faced, downplaying others' ideas. Thinking that my idea, in quotes, is the best idea. China, when the only way that staff are shown value is a pizza party. Yeah.
I would say maybe another subtle way is, you know, the one about your unique skills and talents being utilized, but like not having the flexibility within the agency where like if you keep getting jobs that are not you're not good at and being told just to like figure it out or that it's part of your job as opposed to like maybe being like, oh, China's really good at the stuff Allison's not good at. Maybe we can like swap some things or whatever.
I love that flexibility, recognizing and leaning into talents and skills. Yes. Another comment in the chat, or your idea is the only one that matters.
This makes me think about earlier when I talked about how is feedback received. So, is feedback asked for repeatedly, but there doesn't seem to be anything done with that feedback, or on an interpersonal level or on a team level or organizational level, is feedback received well? Is there defensiveness or, you know, quickly given justification of we have to do this, this, and this? That doesn't really work while simultaneously asking for real, authentic, valid, vulnerable feedback. There's a give and take there.
I'm also wondering about just the human, like just the normal thing that we do where we tend to like find cliques of like-minded people and then like we work with them or we'll have those side conversations with them and like you kind of just create this alliance because you maybe would be friends out in the real world or something. And I don't think that's overt, so I don't think that someone's acting in a deliberate way to undermine anyone else, but I'm sure that is probably damaging on some level, especially if there's folks on the team who like maybe aren't gelling like that with other people because they have such a different background than everyone else or some other stuff going on.
I've called those the meetings after the meeting. Yes. They're subtle, they're not necessarily intentionally hostile, but they can add to that less than safe workplace. Absolutely. We can also reflect on the four signs that China spoke about earlier of psychologically unsafe culture for women of color from the Inclusion with Purpose book. I actually, let me step back a couple slides. Let me go back to that. So if we think of these and consider this scenario, how can these also then be impacting?
Well, I'm sure, I don't know who, I forget all the agencies people are in here, but I go to all the COC meetings and there are a lot of really small agencies, right, doing the work. And so I'm guessing that many of them don't have like an HR department. So I don't know that they would maybe even know who to report bias to.
Thank you for sharing that, Allison. You brought up such a great point. Is there a procedure in place? Is there a safe way to report bias? And then also, if there is, did they get that information during staff orientation when they joined the organization? Did their supervisor share that information with them? It makes a huge difference if someone intentionally shared that resource or that pathway for reporting bias with them, and if their supervisor shared that with them as well. So those are great questions for this situation. And then also what I'm wondering, because you brought up COCs, is, what community is Maria in, if she is a woman of color, or if she has another marginalized identity, maybe a parent or not a parent. She may be the only person at that agency with that specific identity if it is a small organization. And depending on the community throughout Michigan, they all look so different. So that may have factored into how she interacted with her team, how much perfection was included before she presented the idea and shared it with everyone. It may have also been a factor with how she was reprimanded or how feedback was shared with her. Yes, and in the comments, lack of confidentiality. Yes. I see that we've got some emoji reactions in the chat, so I always love to see that. We are overdue for your break, so we are giving you your 10-minute break now. So we're going to get back at 4:11, and then time is going to fly by because it's all coming together, and I'm very excited to see what you all create and share with us. It's going to be great. So please take a rest, and we'll see you at 4:11.
If you're watching the recording, take a break, but I'm stopping it.
Okay, it is 4:11. Welcome back, everyone. So we have touched on part of this throughout the training. So why is it hard to create psychological safety? We want to avoid being perceived as ignorant, so we don't ask questions. We want to avoid being thought of as incompetent, so we don't admit weaknesses or mistakes. To avoid seeming intrusive, we don't offer ideas. And to avoid being branded as negative, we don't criticize the status quo. I heard a lot of comments and feedback throughout the training that touched on these points. And the opposite of these feelings of not wanting to appear ignorant or incompetent or intrusive or negative is having a space where we feel safe to be imperfect and to have half-thought ideas and brainstorm together, and a space where we assume best intent for everyone else and ourselves. and a space where feedback is welcomed and support is given, and where there isn't a negative consequence or criticism as a result of imperfection being put into space. And Beth, I see your hand up.
Could you expound a little bit more on number 3, the intrusive, avoiding being intrusive and offering ideas?
Yeah, so we kind of saw that in the example with Maria, but there's this idea that the default is a top-down structure of we don't want to give ideas or feedback to our supervisor or someone above us. And the idea that we don't want to overstep or share feedback with maybe someone on our level, a colleague or a coworker. And that's hard because folks may not explicitly ask for feedback. But if we're creating a culture where ideas are never shared unless they're perfect, and you only share them separately with your supervisor before sharing with the team, you're not creating a culture where folks can assume that best intent and give feedback and know it will be received well and give it with best intent. So kind of that team psychological safety where we hold back, we don't share our ideas because we don't think there's enough time, or they're not perfect enough, or there's a clear culture of how ideas are shared, when they're shared. You only share them if someone explicitly asks for them. Maybe they're only shared in the yearly survey, but that dynamic and how it is interpersonal on your team, on an organizational level, that all matters. And thank you for your question. And again, every moment that we withhold our thoughts, we rob ourselves and our colleagues of small moments of learning. And this stifles innovation in our teams and in the organization as a whole. And that ultimately affects the folks that we are trying to serve and help through our organization. Few managers stop to consider what ideas, concerns, or questions may have been lurking in people's minds but held back. Simply put, the act of not speaking up with an important work-relevant idea is not visible. I also want to uplift this last one. So we don't want to criticize the status quo. So how the status quo looks like at your organization is directly related to psychological safety. And then also you shared great examples of the status quo with regard to leadership and folks below leadership. We're at different levels of leadership, but also the status quo of staff that have been there a long time and staff that are just joining, or young staff, less experienced staff, and more experienced staff. So how does that status quo look? Because that also impacts the peer-to-peer, interpersonal, team psychological safety. They may be on the same level, but that impacts how safe someone feels. Another aspect, on the previous slide, the last aspect I wanted to highlight too was the dynamic of where folks are. So who is remote and who is in the office? And then also the different types of office spaces. So are you in the satellite office or are you in the main office? Are you in the side of the building that directly has clients coming through? Maybe it's the shelter part of the building, or the intake desk, the welcome center, or are you removed from that and more on the program side? Because all of these aspects contribute to the status quo, and as we said earlier, horizontal hostility or a toxic workplace culture, that is all connected to psychological safety. Okay, so here are some best practices for creating team psychological safety. Make it clear why employees' voices matter. So again, when you're asking for folks to share feedback, ideas, thoughts, concerns, are you sharing why that is important to you? Are you sharing how it will be used or what impact that could make? That ties into values like ethical communication, transparency, respect. And this is something that has to be done consistently. It can't just be a one and done. And that would apply to all of these actually, is because they're part of a culture change. So they're going to take time and consistency to really make an impact on the workplace culture. And also, again, with transparency and clarity and ethical communication, how are we establishing norms and expectations? And this is twofold. So how is leadership doing this? How is middle management doing this? And then also, how are we doing this with our peers? So every interaction we have is a chance to call people in or to call them out. It is a chance to assume best intent and create an opportunity for psychological safety or an opportunity to reinforce parts of workplace culture that maybe we don't want to reinforce. Encourage open communication and actively listen to employees. Again, someone pointed this out earlier in the training, is are we actually actively listening? And it's funny because this is a skill that many of us are trained on to work with our clients, but are we taking time to do that with our colleagues? And is that apparent? And are we practicing that culture? And with encouraging open communication, that ties to the first point, is are we being transparent about why we want open communication? Two things that really bother me are one, when someone says, "How are you doing?" and it's clear they have no intention of actually saying how you're doing, like they're saying it and they're ready to get into the meeting or something. And then the other thing that bothers me is, does anyone have any questions? When it's very clear that they're not going to pause and answer any questions. So part of encouraging open and communication is actually showing that through your actions, through your words, through repeated practice, and it's going to take some time to build up that trust. And Paige, are there any points or examples you want to highlight for these other three here? I want to give you a chance to share your insight.
Yeah. In addition to additional ways of making sure our team members feel supported are these last couple that are listed here. So showing appreciation and humility, that looks like when people do speak up and being willing and doing it often. Expressing appreciation is beyond the pizza parties that China mentioned earlier. And being showing humility is about admitting your own mistakes. So sharing your own lessons that you've learned. So particularly as a leader, because there are many in this space that are in roles of leadership. If as a leader, you can own up to and demonstrate how you've learned from your mistakes, this paves the way for others. So it's really important to model behavior that we want to see in our team and normalize vulnerability. I can't say that enough, normalize vulnerability. It includes things like being respectful, being open to feedback, asking for feedback, and being willing ourselves to take risks. And then responding productively looks like being curious, engage on the note of curiosity, to know more than being on the blame or shame spectrum. Blame and shame are key in shutting people down and shutting input down. So it really matters how we as leaders respond, that we be curious instead of casting blame. And if we already think we know what another person is thinking, we are not in that space to have a real conversation. So we have to be learners all the time. And again, that reflects right back to that real listening, that active listening, which we all talked about early on, and again, are landing on here. There's additional components that supervisors provide really important structure and support for psychological safety. And it's so important that if you are in a position of supervising, that you don't assume that you are already doing these things. They need to be purposeful and intentional effort. So really cultivating that purposefully. We want to also make sure we avoid criticism that could be perceived as harsh or belittling. That doesn't mean avoiding feedback. Feedback is essential. However, we want to focus on constructive feedback rather than just pointing out errors. So we can frame those challenges or mistakes, however you want to think about it in this space, as a part of the learning process. That story early on that China shared is one that just stays with me, the way that that supervisor framed it. And someone early on in the chat here talked about how their own supervisor remains open to receiving feedback. Those are the kinds of things we can very purposefully incorporate in. Help the folks we're supervised see the setbacks as temporary, as manageable, and reinforce that everyone has room to grow, and it's okay to not have all the answers right away, immediately, or even ever. Being reliable and consistent in your feedback and in your behavior is also essential to psychological safety, because when people trust that they're going to be treated fairly and with respect, they feel safer to be vulnerable. And once again, being transparent in your intentions and your decisions to avoid confusion or feelings of manipulation. So ways we can structure all of these aspects are to ask for their input, ask for feedback on the supervision process, even asking folks how do they like to receive feedback. Really provides supportive structures around how you can then incorporate that and give that feedback. It can help them feel more in control as well, and consenting to feedback as well. Celebrate successes, no matter how small. Take the time to celebrate the things instead of just skipping on to the next project. Reinforces their strengths, it reinforces their achievements, and it builds confidence, encourages folks to continue growing. China, anything else here you want to add?
Yeah, along with what you mentioned about celebrating successes, no matter how small, doing it often and frequently and with intent and in a genuine way. This just reminds me of the common phrase of the compliment sandwich. So it's become very popular, and this idea that you should give feedback with a sandwich of starting with a compliment or a positive aspect that you'd like to share, then the feedback, then another positive comment or compliment. And the research shows that actually folks need 7 positive pieces of information or compliments or feedback before they can really feel safe to trust and take in that negative piece of feedback. And I think intuitively that makes sense, because if you're noticing you only get compliments when they're tied to your negative feedback, you're going to be ready and waiting for the okay, but what does this really mean? And it's not authentic or organic or genuine. But we as humans just naturally want to receive positive feedback all the time. And I think we all have those thoughts and want to share them, but with time constraints and workplace culture and the fact that we're doing important work, we forget. And so I want folks to remember that you can make a positive impact on psychological safety, especially as a supervisor, by celebrating those wins frequently, often, and repeatedly. And in the comments, yes, I can repeat the sandwich idea. So it's this idea that you share a positive thing, then the thing you want them to approve, or the negative comment, then another positive thing. So again, encouraging folks to think about a culture of celebrating small wins, repeatedly showing gratitude for the folks that we work with and the amazing work that they do.
And I just want to reiterate that what China was saying about the sandwich, while that is a common thing, we know from research that that is not effective. That people need to hear more of the positive. Our brains naturally and biologically are wired to hold on to the dangerous things, or in this case, like the harder criticism, because of survival mechanisms. So we need to hear more positive reinforcements.
Yeah, and this is connected psychology that I learned unrelated to this training, but I have to share it now. When your brain takes a risk and it goes well, that releases dopamine. But if we don't pause to acknowledge that win, then we're not releasing the dopamine, and our brain doesn't focus on it, and then we don't get that benefit. So if we can take time to acknowledge and thank people for taking risks and being vulnerable and celebrate them multiple times, that is a protective factor against how hard it is to be vulnerable and take risks at an organization. And Beth, you have your hand up.
Yes, love that comment. Yeah, the power of TED, which is a program that works off of drama and empowerment roles, and I found this to be incredibly useful for challenging behavior or results, is to ask what they did, what they feel they did well. All right, so we can celebrate that, and yeah, what'd you do well, and then ask, what do you think you might do different, enforcing the lessons learned, and then asking permission for additional feedback, like there's something else I noticed that might be useful to you. So that's it.
Thank you for sharing that. Do we have anything else on this slide page?
No, it's time.
Okay, it's time. Okay, so we are going to have you go back into your breakout rooms. And so in part one, we watched that video and we looked for the red flags. So we want you to go back and discuss some possible solutions to be implemented to improve psychological safety at that organization and in the interactions that Maria had. So what steps are needed to cultivate psychological safety at that organization? What would you do differently? And we're going to give you 10 minutes. Paige, I need math help. Okay, 10 minutes. We're going to give you 10 minutes. I know you could talk about this for a long time, but you'll get 10 minutes. And I think the breakout rooms have started.
Allison, would you be able to copy the questions that I just put into the chat and do the well, why am I forgetting what it's called again? The broadcast
Yep,
to all. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Welcome back, everyone. So we have a few minutes here where we would love folks to share out what they discussed in their group. So please feel free to unmute or add your thoughts in the chat.
And regarding this conversation, I think that these questions are ones we could spend an entire day talking about strategy and policy and all of that. So this conversation with the last few minutes of our training today is intended to be conversational. There's not an expectation that anyone here came up with a final product or like an outlined policy plan to support Maria and Maria's colleagues.
It would, can I speak? One of the things that I'm struggling with is that in that example, at every level, it was unsafe. So where do you even start? And how do you not lose the momentum that you might make with one team and then have it gone because, well, this other team, and then it all falls backwards when it's so pervasive? That's a big task because that looked pervasive. And so my specific question is, do you start with supervisors and say, all right, supervisors, this is what we need to do. This is how we need to act. This is putting together as a team. Supervisors, let's figure out how to put a safe place in. I mean, where do we start?
Can I chime in on hers?
Oh, please do.
Okay. Well, our team basically said the same thing, but I think for a safe space, to me it needs to start from your leadership team, to me, because if the leadership team is not leading by example and having being able to have those safe spaces, it needs to start from the leadership team. And once the leadership team get themselves together, they can then get the rest of their team together, is how I would approach it. I don't know if there's no right or wrong answer, but if the leadership is not moving in a positive manner, then the next team, the rest of the team will not move that way. And a lot of times the people who are at entry level is usually the ones who are affected the most, with different things that go on within the work environment, especially even those who are dealing with clients or where those workers are sitting. And if the leadership team is not coming in with any type of positivity and action, then a lot of times it just affects the rest of the team in that negative manner of how you approach an employee. It has to start from the top. And if the top doesn't know how to approach their team or the people they're supervising to supervise others, a lot of time it's seen in a negative way because it's not the top of the team is not helping the rest of the tier. So I don't know if that's the correct approach or not.
Lucky for us, our executive director has sent 2 of us to this training. And so the initiative is to get this started. But when you when you have so many, because we are a large organization, for a nonprofit anyway. I mean, does that logically make sense that we set up teams? I mean, obviously, we'd have to establish what the culture is from the top down, as you're starting pointing out, and then promoting it with HR onboarding and initial meetings that the supervisors have. But we need to make sure that the supervisors know what to say, and how do we start practicing before we start putting our foot in it because we didn't figure it out a little bit better before trying to launch something? The false starts is what I'm most fearful of, and not having, but I guess starting at the top, mapping it out by establishing in writing what the culture should be, what is important, getting buy-in and understanding from the board on down, and start rolling it out at the top of the tier down. Oh, easy peasy.
Oh, easy peasy
Not easy
indeed, right?
peasy, not easy peasy.
No,
I
you're
wish it was going to
talking,
be. Yeah.
yeah, you're talking about creating a cultural shift. So this is not easy peasy, but the approach that you are outlining is an approach that is one that we've seen taken to develop psychological safety. And how you choose to implement it could include, like, maybe there's a book club, and maybe as a part of building the buy-in and cultivating the organizational values, once you've established those, maybe there is a book that supports that and you move through that. Maybe it's a book like, I don't know, Dare to Lead by Brene Brown or Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Those are just two really cool ones that talk about a lot of this. I see other hands up and I want to give more space. Alexandria.
Speaking of that, for my organization specifically, we have a couple of different employee-led committees. We have an employee care committee that is really there to just help support in any way that you need. It can get you connected to any resources you may need outside of the workplace, in the workplace, etc. And then we also have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee as well. And both of those committees that are employee led, and they're all different levels. They come from entry level people to people, you know, I'm a program manager, so there's, you know, assistant director, director, etc. And we do a town hall meeting agency wide, and every time they have like a little slide where they talk about what initiatives they're working on that month. And they also do fun little activities that are open to everybody in the organization. So for like the employee care committee, they've done Zumba, they've done yoga classes, things like that. And then for the DEI, they had a Kwanzaa event around the holidays, and a couple of other holiday events that are for, you know, different types of religious backgrounds and things like that. And they're open to anybody. And as a manager, if my staff comes to me and says, hey, I know I have this on my schedule for today, but I actually would really like to go to this DEI event. We always make sure that we give space as much as we possibly can to allow our staff to go to these things. And I think that those types of committees within an organization are a huge way to push psychological safety and make sure that everybody feels included, everyone feels safe and heard. I just wanted to share that in case nobody else has that in their organization. It works really well for us. And I could get more information and, share that with you guys if they have any other resources that they think would work for other organizations. But those two things stood out to me as we were talking about this, and are very, very helpful. I've heard from my staff specifically that, when they see these things pop up on our town hall meetings, that they're very excited to attend them. So they're obviously working and people love them, and it's a great way to make people feel safe and heard. So I just wanted to share that.
I love that. Creative, innovative approaches, and very much community supported care. Right? Not just saying go home and do your self-care, but cultivating community around that kind of care.
And I want to add to that, we just started that as well at our agency, where everyone gets to be a part of this change, of having different activities and going to the DEI events as well. So it's working better within our organization, and we're also getting a lot of positive staff feedback as well of being a part of these different activities and things that we provide as well.
Okay. We would love to continue having more dialogue on this because one, just hearing all the innovation, the strategies, supports in our own orgs, across orgs, brainstorming what could happen for the Community Healing Alliance. However, we want to be mindful of time. So we're going to attempt to bring our Mentimeter back. And I say attempt because let me pull it up again. All right, so for our Menti, if you go back to it before or want to click on the QR code again, that should bring you to our next slide, I'm hoping. And also, if you're having any trouble, the question that we're looking to address right now is, how is your perception of what psychological safety shifted and or grown since the start of this workshop? Oh, good. I'm seeing things popping up on the Mentimeter.
If you're having trouble getting the Mentimeter to work, you can put it in the chat and I can transfer it over as well.
Oops. Apparently I can't click on things right now. Mhm. validation, curiosity, increased curiosity, how important it is to make sure everyone has a safe space, long-term value with high impact, hope in all capital letters. Yes, it gave me tools to go back and use, talked about it, and thinking about it is half the battle. I am more aware of the subtle ways that psychological safety can be harmed and the need to address those. The importance of making sure everyone has a safe space, be consistent with the process. Wow. A lot of good stuff coming through. Thank you all so much. China, last thoughts.
Yes, so I have one last thought. I wish we could have continued our discussion for so much longer, but you all have been in the training space for so long. I will just add that psychological safety is something created between multiple people. So for every person that changes how they interact or changes how they interact with team members, with their organization, how they choose to reinforce or change up the workplace culture, that makes a difference. So please remember that every person that changes counts, and that is a step closer and a tangible step, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing, or there's no perfect way to start. Yes. And also thank you everyone very much for your amazing participation.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat. So we thank you for sharing your time. This was a large chunk of time away. I thank Paige and China for their time. And we will send you the slide presentation when they send it to me. I'll send it out. I don't have everyone's email addresses maybe, so I'll send it to who registered you, but you'll get it. A survey will pop up at the end of this. Please take it. I take those seriously. And earlier in the chat, if you scroll up, I put in instructions for you to receive your CEUs if you need them. And we have a training on disability and inclusion that's pretty much all day next Friday. And as a thank you for attending today, we will give you $25 off of that one. So thank you all so much. That's all I have. If no one else has any other closing thoughts, then I say have an awesome Thursday, and I hope tomorrow's even better than today.